So the first question would be, how did the reconciliation process function, especially at the beginning, and what role did external actors have, especially the European Union?
I mean, wars and atrocities in the wars are always something that shatters basically the societies. And what happened throughout the 90s from Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia to Kosovo, Serbia, Macedonia was a horrible landmark in the recent history of former Yugoslavia, or the Western Balkans if you wish. And at the beginning there was a lot of pressure, especially from outside, to make a kind of a new start, kick off the region towards a normal, democratic, pro-European future. In Bosnia, for example, we had the Dayton Peace Agreement, which explicitly tried to put the sides together, to work together. We had attempts from the European Union, from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, from Council of Europe, to invest and to put a lot of money into initiatives to establish the facts, count the numbers of victims, try to tell the stories, organize and support NGOs fighting for reconciliation, for dealing with the past. So there was a huge wave of optimism that the remnants of the past and the ghosts of the past can be overcome in the end. That was at the same time also a moment of optimism in terms of Europe making its way towards Europe, in terms of democracy, democratization. And on a global level, we were in the middle of this democratization paradigm, in the middle of the assumption, if we just move step by step, be brave, if we do the homework, we will basically arrive at this stage where we have Europe, democracy fulfilled, good life, prosperity, equality, etc., etc. In the meantime, a lot has changed. Europe was hit by several crises. Today we face a situation where we have a competition between democracies and authoritarian states, where we have a rise of illiberalism, of populism, and where basically we don't speak anymore about democratization or the wave of democratization, but rather about the autocratization. So basically a trend where societies step by step seem to move towards different or various types of authoritarian regimes. And these new regimes, and we have them in the Balkans too, quite prominently, these regimes play basically a very simple game, which is the game of the othering. So basically the other is always the one to blame. They play with this notion of we and us and the others, and they use nationalism as much as they can, nationalist narratives, basically to establish what they want to establish, which is their truth. And that simply has a very negative effect on reconciliation and dealing with the past. As long as one of the major tools and main tools to create politics and to do politics in general terms is populism, is nationalism, you need to go back to some kind of repositorium of basically this kind of nationalist feelings. You need to play with emotions, you need to play with fears, and the easiest way is always to blame the other. And this is what happens today quite often in the region, and this is basically also where the international community and the EU has not found a proper way to address it. It's quite often that the European Union compromises certain values, lowers the pressure in order to get stability or to achieve some small compromises, and that definitely hurts the process of reconciliation.
What were, in your opinion, the biggest challenges in the process of reconciliation, and what were the strategies to overcome those challenges? How are they affecting positively and negatively?
The biggest challenge from the very beginning on was to establish the facts. I mean, we know that in the process of reconciliation, there is no momentum of creating a new narrative, of meeting each other halfway, of embracing the other if there is no facts about what has happened. And we still haven't, I mean, there was a lot of effort to establish facts, and we know the numbers. For example, we have details about victims in Bosnia, about victims in Serbia, in Kosovo, in Macedonia, in Croatia, but we don't have the official policies accepting the facts, which means there are still various numbers in different opinions in different parts of the publics in the states, and they are in a way clashing on each other. So if we take, I mean, one of the biggest war crimes, the genocide in Srebrenica, where the facts about the victims were established and where the international judiciary has ruled the events in Srebrenica as a genocide, and at the same time we have still an ongoing discussion about the number of people that were or supposedly were not killed in parts of Serbia or in the Republic of Srpska. This is basically where this kind of a clash is happening in front of our eyes. So this is probably one of the biggest obstacles and biggest challenges. The second biggest obstacle is that there has not been or has not happened a kind of a process of getting in or coming into terms on the political level what has happened in the wars. This is partly because some of the people at the political stage today, they basically rely on policies and narratives that were present in the 90s. So they basically use them as a source for legitimation of their policies today. And this is also because a kind of a process of coming to terms with the past in the broader public, in the broader political realm, has never happened properly. We have seen, we have experienced some of the attempts to come together between the nations. I mean, for example, during the 2000s, Croatians and Serbs, the Croatian president back then, Ivo Josipovic, and the Serbian president Tadic, they tried basically to reach hands to each other and to try some kind of a new process of reconciliation. But since then, for example, the relationship between Serbia and Croatia has worsened quite significantly, and this was one of the major conflict lines, and today there is basically almost no dialogue. The same goes for a very difficult dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo. The same goes for the big political questions in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where there is no proper, productive, effective dialogue between the Serb leadership and the Bosniak leadership and the Croat leadership. So basically this kind of political level, where the preconditions for meeting up with challenges were not met consciously or subconsciously, per intention or without intention, this stands as one of the biggest problems until today. When you don't have, I mean, the assumption is quite simple. Also, if you still have hatred, if you still have animosities, if you still have clashes between former neighbors, it's quite obvious that like natural economic, trade, social, human exchange of goods, of capitals, of movies, of whatever you take, is basically not going as it is supposed to go in a kind of a normal way. So basically, as long as we have this kind of a past standing between the present and a kind of a better positive future, there will be negative effects. And that might then, I mean, obviously also affect the people on a small scale. So it might be that someone from Serbia visits Croatia and experiences something bad, or someone from Croatia travels to some part of Belgrade, experiences something bad, or that Albanians are afraid to travel to Belgrade and to enroll in a study at the university, and vice versa. So this is basically, these are negative effects on all possible levels of life, of everyday life, of political life, social, economic, academic life, whatever you take. And positively, I mean, there is not so much to say positively on this very general state level. There are a lot of positive stories underneath. So when you move from the level of states, of institutions, and move towards the level of people, of exchange and solidarity between persons that are traveling across the region, that are sharing, that have relatives in the end in all parts of the region. Here there is a lot of small changes. I mean, there is, for example, in the arts and cultural scene, there is a quite normal cooperation between Serbs, Croats, Albanians, playing together plays on the stage in the theater, or shooting movies together, or creating or writing music, etc., etc. And as I also mentioned, I mean, there is also a sense of solidarity, as this whole entire region seems to have. I mean, it has a common past. It has very close cultural ties. We do understand each other. We partly speak the same language. We have watched and we still watch the same movies. We have listened to the same music, and we still do listen to a very similar or same music. So this kind of a normalcy on the everyday level, this is something that cannot evaporate. I mean, it simply cannot disappear. It is here, but in order to make its way basically towards the surface and to become a dominant paradigm, there is a need to have this kind of a bottom-up change, meaning political change, meaning change through the channels of communication, through the channels of official presentation of history, official narratives, and when then this bottom up and top down level meet somewhere in the middle, we can probably speak about a productive step by step yet, but a productive process of reconciliation.
Let me ask you the following question. It's interesting because we're doing this interview in Vienna, and Vienna is one of the cities in Europe, especially where the diaspora meets of the former Yugoslav countries. So how would you describe the role of the diaspora in the reconciliation process, and how did they impact the process, and how is it today? For example, I would take the young students who are coming from former Yugoslavia to study here in Vienna. They seem to actually connect with each other, to be friends. How do you comment on that?
I mean, diaspora, especially in Austria, and diaspora from the region of former Yugoslavia, is very diverse and very big and very huge. I mean, this is one of the biggest diaspora groups that we have in Austria, apart from Germans. It's bigger than Turkish diaspora. And there are different layers of this diaspora. So there is the old Gastarbeiter, foreign workers diaspora from the 50s and 60s. There are a lot of refugees that came in the 90s from the wars in Croatia, later from the war in Bosnia, also from the war in Kosovo in the second half of the 90s. And then there is this kind of a new diaspora in the last 2 decades, be it students, be it people that emigrated in search for work, for labor, for better life. So there are different layers, and there are also different, so to say, classes of people, like belongings to different social strata. So you have workers, simple workers that just worked hard from the 50s, 60s, 70s, raised kids, but they basically quite often just reproduce or are not interested in what's happening in their home countries. And if they are interested, they quite frequently just reproduce what you have in the mainstream of the countries in the region. The younger ones, the more educated ones, are more mobile. So they are prone and to listen to different information. They meet each other. When they study together, they spend time. And they tend, obviously, to be more critical about what has happened and what's happening on the territory of their former countries, home countries. So basically the picture is very mixed. And in Vienna you will find, we have experienced in the past even clashes between different groups of diaspora. So when the soccer European Championship was taking place in Vienna. There were clashes at Ottakringelstrasse in the 15th district, 15th and 16th district between, let's say, Serbs, Croats, Albanians. But at the same time, you would also experience like wonderful movie festival, cultural events, parties, where basically, or even initiatives against, very critical initiatives against the dominant trends in the home country. I mean, during the in 2000, during the protests in Serbia against the Vučić regime, this 1 out of 5 million, and later protest in 2000s, there were people, young people also in Vienna, going to the streets and protesting the same way like their fellow citizens in Serbia. So basically, if you wish to have a kind of a positive reading of the behavior of the diaspora, you could say, yes, the youth, the younger generation has started to depart and to leave this kind of a burden of the past behind and have a normal European life that supposedly and we expectedly we should have also in the regional former Yugoslavia. But some other circles, I mean, might be also sometimes youth, but from different parts of the social strata, they sometimes also tend to reproduce the hatred and this kind of a binary codes from their home countries. So the situation is mixed, and then the question is, what impact could and does diaspora have on the situation in the home countries? This is limited, unfortunately. This is limited. I mean, there are individual cases where, like, very brave, courageous people go back or engage in circular migration, engage in activities, even really engage in the reconciliation activities, like join NGOs, join groups, write, publish, meet the others, etc., etc. But generally, diasporas in the societies in the Western Balkans are not, don't have this kind of a very positive label sticking on it. So quite often, when they come back, they are seen as someone who has left and who is not solidary. In a kind of a solidary relationship to their home countries. Quite often they are excluded from participating or taking part in public debates in economic and social life, and they are not in the public. They are not a subject that is taken seriously in most of the countries. Quite often they're also reduced to someone bringing money, remittances. I mean, and some of the countries in the region are dependent on remittances. I mean, like Kosovo or Bosnia or even Serbia, if you will just take out the remittances from diaspora out of the general economic flux in the region, it will definitely endanger the economies. So it's a very mixed situation. Few positive signs, few very typical, not negative, but very typical trends in behavior of the diaspora that are common for the region too. And in any case, a lot to do to make diaspora a productive, constructive and integral part or positive part of the debates on reconciliation in the region.
What can we expect from the future? What can be done better? And have we as a region overcome the past?
I mean, the region has not managed to overcome the past. I mean, the past, in a way, if you on a very theoretical principle level, I mean, there is no way to overcome the past. I mean, the past is here. I mean, past is just an integral part of the present, of the future. We have the history, and history makes our and influences basically our lives. It's then more not the question whether we should overcome the past. It's probably the question how to establish a normal relationship to the past and how to establish a notion of the past that is not burdened with wars, with hatred, with divisions, with nationalism, but a past that is accepted in terms of facts, in terms of what has happened, a past that all of us have basically dealt with internally on the individual level, a past that we can take as something where we have parts of the past that we can be proud of, and we have parts of the past that we can be ashamed of, which is simply normal for every past. I mean, if you take the Austrian past, there are parts of the Austrian history where you can be very proud of, and there are parts of the Austrian history that you really have to be ashamed about what's happened. So basically, we are not supposed to overcome the past, we are supposed to approach the past differently. And for that process, for this process, meeting the past, dealing with the past, or reconciliation, if you wish, in the end consequence, there are obviously many pieces that you need to put into the mosaic or into the puzzle to create a kind of a positive vision of the future. So there is a piece of facts, obviously, there is a piece of politics that needs to open up and to leave this kind of a nationalist or ethno-nationalist discourses and populism and nationalism behind. There is a need to have a new generation of people oriented towards progressive policies that are more democratic, more equal, more just. There is a need to change the educational systems, while in some parts of the region we have progressive education. In the most parts of the region we don't have. We still have this kind of a reproduction of our truth in the educational system of national states, which produces narratives also for the young generation that then tend to be accepted as normal. And when something wrong is accepted as normal, it's a long process to move away from that kind of instrumentalized notion of the past. And last but not least, we have to embrace in the region, in order to move forward, we have to embrace the everyday policies and sentiments of the population that quite often are very much better than the official policies. So we do have, as I said, a lot of cases where people meet, come together, and live this kind of a common region as it was used to be in the past as something quite normal. Meeting, singing, dancing, spending time, supporting each other, speaking the language, listening to the music. This kind of everyday lives leveled together with some kind of a new generation coming up might pave the way for the region to leave the ghosts of the past behind and to move towards a different, better, more progressive and more democratic horizon.